I'm Andrew Ledford, and this is going to be the first episode of Behavior by Design Training for Change. And, we're always either looking to change something in our life or change has found us. And that is what this podcast is going to explore. Behavior can be a difficult thing for people to change. I always think of changing behavior sort of like trying to catch the wind and hold it in your hand. Not that easy. We're going to be cycling through science, emotion, ethics, culture, and strategy. And we're going to be doing this oftentimes with stories. And you're going to hear me talk about a lot of different influential thinkers on the subject. Everything from ancient Babylonians to modern day neuroscientists. So we cover quite a wide range of topics because we're always becoming something that we've never been before. We go from an infant to old age. And we see this in animals too. Newborn puppy on into adolescence, adulthood, and on into old age. Just happens a lot quicker, let's say, with a dog. And this is the becoming to being and then becoming something else again cycle. And again, we're going to look back all the way to the very first classic stories written in humanity up to modern times. And why is change so difficult? And one of the reasons is because change is often painful. And we try to avoid things that are painful and things that we don't like. And another reason is there's a cost to change. There's always a cost to change, whether it's the effort you need to put out, whether it is resources that you have to commit, such as financial resources, what else, equipment, whatever it might be, that is going to take away from something else. So we could also think of this as what opportunity costs. If you're changing one behavior, you might not have a chance to do another behavior. So there is some opportunity costs there. And change increases stress. And most of us have enough stress in our life without going out of our way to make some changes. And that is exactly what I am proposing we do. However, I want to do it in a way that reduces the stress as much as possible, and there are techniques for that. One of the reasons change is difficult is because we want to hold on to the past. And there is a mythic story. We're going to be looking at myth as well. A monster, a creature called Holdfast. And he was the keeper of the past. And we have to learn how to deal with that monster if we want to change and move forward. And why is it important to consciously practice behavior by design? Well, we want to intentionally influence the change. That's why we want to intentionally influence the changes in our life. And one way we're going to do this, again, I mentioned we're going to be looking at a lot of these principles and ideas and theories through story. And stories make memories. Stories make our minds, basically. So strong stories can make strong minds, big ideas. But on the flip side, a strong negative story can constrict our views, make our minds smaller, our worldview smaller. So how do we build a life narrative? Because this is really what we're talking about, going from becoming to being to becoming something else again. That's a life narrative. And it's through the day in and day out rituals, the things that happen from week to week, month to month, the continuous behavior that goes over and over again, the little behaviors, little goals that lead to bigger goals, bigger impacts from one year to the next until we have climbed that mountain and have reached our mission. And you can tell all these little goals, all these little decisions we need to make, sometimes they just become a bit of drudgery. The same thing, kind of boring. And we need to find a strategy to keep us going during that time and help us work through it in as cheerful and positive a way as possible. One of the big motifs of change, transformation, we could say, is the death and rebirth motif. We see this in the Bible. You die to the world, reborn in Christ. Buddhism has a similar idea. Joseph Campbell talks about this quite a bit. And even in the strategy of John Boyd, somebody who's very practical, we find the destruction and creation cycle. And that is something we're going to be exploring. Now, most of us need some kind of motivation to change, and that can be extrinsic, from the outside, or intrinsic motivation, something we just want to do. But we often need more than just willpower or desire to actually overcome some of the things that hold us back. And we're going to be talking about that. What's your motivation? And how much effort do you need? So we want to make it so that our systems can support varying levels of motivation, and that's kind of important. So we do need to develop that mission. I think it's more important to have a mission that you're trying to accomplish instead of just a lot of random goals. You need to have it so that it's a cohesive system that is working towards not only some goals, but a greater mission. And goals, they can be broken up into a couple different kinds. We can have finite goals where you have a beginning, you have a middle, and you have an end. And then we have the infinite goals, and they are continuous and ongoing, that day in and day out cycle of life. And here's a little something that came to me in a hypnopompic dream. And I get these quite often. I usually get up and write them down as soon as I get out of bed. Sometimes I get out of bed and write them down just so that I won't forget. But a hypnopompic dream is that state when you're waking up, so from sleeping to waking, but you're not awake. And I often have quite a bit of insight at this time. Some of it is quite useful, and some of it is random noise or just interesting noise. But this little phrase came to me one morning. It says, the goals change actions, and actions change goals. And when you accomplish a goal, goals change goals. So that is something to keep in mind.